Hi, today I'm going to teach you how to make baking powder biscuits. They're easy and quick to make. They only take about 4 or 5 minutes to mix up and 12 to 15 minutes to bake. So the first thing I'm going to do is preheat my oven to 450 degrees. I've also got a couple of cast iron skillets here that I will be putting the biscuits on once they're made to bake in. You can use a regular baking sheet, a pizza stone, pie tins, whatever you have handy. This will be my board for rolling things out in, my mixing bowl, and there's just a few simple ingredients for your biscuits. 2 cups of flour, 4 tablespoons or 1/4 cup of Crisco or other solid shortening, or if you have lard you can use that, 1/2 teaspoon of salt, 2 teaspoons of baking powder, 3/4 cup of milk. You can use whole milk, regular milk, 2%, 1%. You can actually, if you want a little richer biscuit, use 3/4 cup of sour cream into which you've stirred 1/2 teaspoon of baking soda. Or if you want something a little different, you could actually use tomato juice, or if you want a little spicier, you could use Bloody Mary mix. So let's start mixing things together. I've got my flour here. I've got a 1/2 cup measuring scoop. I'm going to stir my flour a little bit. If you don't stir the flour, you'll end up with too much flour. It packs down. So I'm going to have a 1/2 cup. So that's 1, 2, 3, 4. Should give me 2 cups. And I'm going to go ahead and sprinkle some on my board here while we're doing that. So that'll be handy. I'm going to add a 1/2 teaspoon of salt. Now I happen to know what that looks like in my hand. If you don't, measure the salt out and pour in your hand and see how it looks. 2 teaspoons baking powder. Now I actually have fine baking powder harder to measure my hand, so I'm actually going to measure that. 1, 2, and I'm going to go ahead and just stir in my dry ingredients together. Get them all combined. And then I'm going to add into that my Crisco. Actually, I've already got it here in this 1/4 cup measuring scoop, so I'm just going to scoop that out. Oops. And now if you have a pastry cutter, you can use that to cut the shortening into the dough, but you really don't need to use a pastry cutter. You can actually just use a pair of butter knives or regular table knives. So I'm going to take my knives and I'm actually going to simply just start cutting. You just crisscross the knives back and forth through the larger pieces of the Crisco or shortening, and that is how you cut the shortening into the flour. You could also, if you wanted to make a little sweeter or different biscuit, add 1/2 teaspoon of cinnamon to the flour mixture. Or once you've finished cutting the shortening in, you can stir in a 1/2 cup of grated cheese, or 1/2 cup of minced ham or bacon or sausage or other ingredients of your choice. So again, you just go back and forth with the knives and keep cutting the shortening in. You need to scrape off your knives periodically, stir it a little bit, get the flour from underneath. You want to cut the shortening until the mixture resembles a coarse meal. So we still have some larger lumps in there. We have a little bit of cutting to go, but not much more. Again, if you have a pastry cutter, you can use one of those. I generally do use a pastry cutter these days, though growing up this was all I ever used, was a pair of knives. And we'll just, like I said, cut until the mixture starts to resemble a coarse meal. And we've gotten rid of our larger lumps of shortening. Once this is a coarse meal, we will stir in our flour, our liquid. I've got milk. As I said, you could stir in some sour cream with about a half teaspoon of baking soda added to it. It'll give you a little richer biscuit. Or you could stir in tomato juice or even a Bloody Mary mix to give you a tomato biscuit. So I think we are just about there. Let's get some of these bigger chunks if we can find them. Again, you just kind of cut the knives back and forth like this against each other. A little bit of an angle. You want them to kind of just slice past each other as you cut them back and forth. It's a fairly simple movement. So I think we're about good there. I'm just going to scrape off my knives. I've got my milk candy here. So I'm going to pour the milk in and I will just stir that in. I'm using a fork here to stir. With biscuits, it's important not to overmix the dough. If you overmix them, you will make a tough dough. So we're just going to mix until we get a ball that forms. It's just about all incorporated here. One or two more stirs. And I think we're pretty good to go. So I'm just going to scrape my fork off. And I'm going to turn this out onto my floured board and start rolling it out. Now, biscuit dough is actually soft enough and easy enough. I actually usually just roll it by hand. So what I'm basically going to do is just take the dough and smash it down and fold it in half once or twice and smash it down. As I've told you before, you can use a glass. I will make a comment: if you're using a glass, you should make sure that it's a sturdy glass, something with a thicker, not a real fragile glass, and you don't want to crush it. You want to be relatively gentle. You, of course, don't want to break the glass. Now, 2 or 3 turns here. Your biscuits are not going to spread when they rise, but they will rise in height. They should get to about double in height. So you can roll them. I usually do about a 1/2 inch thick. I'm actually going to roll it down about a 1/4 inch thick and give them one last turn here. If you wanted, you could cut them out at this point and take the thinner halves, spread butter on 1/2, add a little bit of poppy seed or caraway, some diced shrimp or other seafood or meat or even veggie, and then you put the other half of the biscuits on top of each one of those, and you'd have a little biscuit sandwich. So we're good here. Just going to tuck my corners in a little bit, and these will go about twice in height, so that should give us a nice height biscuit. You can use, as I said, a glass to cut them. If you want smaller appetizer-sized biscuits, that's really good if you're doing the cheese or ham or sausage in them. I like to use a shot glass or a smaller cutter. You can even use a square cutter. You could just take a knife and cut them like that if you want. I'm going to use the just a regular biscuit cutter here. Now, if you going to cut them, and I'll start dropping them on my pan. Now when I cut them, I'm going to cut them really close together, and I'm going to end up with some little triangles that we can use as biscuits as well. A couple of other things one of the other things you can add to your biscuits, of course, is raisins. I forgot to mention that. That's one of the things you can mix in the dough before you add the milk. You can add you can also do some kind of like your old thumbprint cookies. You can take and push your thumb down in the middle of those and then fill them with jam. Or if you want to make a fancier tea biscuit, take a sugar cube and soak it in either a little lemon or orange juice. And then sprinkle a little grated lemon or orange on the top, and you'll have a little fancier tea biscuit. Now, you could take these scraps and roll them back into another biscuit. I find that that makes the dough a little tough when you do that. So I'm actually just going to cook a couple of little diamond or extra shaped biscuits here. So we'll just stick those diamonds in there as is. We'll find a little spot to tuck them in. And we'll just tuck those little diamonds in there. Oh, those are too small to make. I'll squish them into one more little guy in there. So I'm going to put these in my oven. It's been preheated to 450. They will bake for 12 to 15 minutes. So I will see you back in 12 to 15. Okay, our biscuits should be done here. There's our timer. We'll go in and I'll grab these out. And you can see we've got some nice biscuits here. So we'll just use a spatula and scoop them into our basket. And those little diamonds or triangles give you some extra little shapes in there. And we will have hot biscuits for dinner. So, those are our biscuits. Now that our biscuits are out of the oven, we're ready to sample a hot biscuit. So we will split it. Add a little butter. And a little jelly. And a little more jelly. And we're ready to eat.